Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. I just saw Niko from Niko's Book Review post his video titled The ABC's Book Title Challenge. And this intrigued me for a few reasons. One, I actually thought of this idea like a few weeks ago. I was like, oh yeah, that would be a pretty cool idea. Maybe I'll do that later on. And then I saw this in Andrew's Discord, and I was like, he beat me to it. He beat me to it. Two, I'm pretty confident that I can defeat this challenge. I have a lot of books, and I'm pretty sure I can get one from every letter. We'll see. And three, and most importantly, this seems like a kind of video that I don't have to do a lot of editing for. So that's always a plus. All right, enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance if you guys see any dust on my shelves. I should have probably cleaned it before I did this, but oh well. And then also just my organization is kind of all over the place, but it makes sense to me, so deal with it. All right, so for the letter A, we're going to go to one of my all-time favorite fantasy series, and literally all of the books in the series start with the letter A. So like Age of Myth, Age of Legend, Age of Death, Age of Empire. That's A. And for B, we're going to go with one of my favorite horror novels of all time, Baby Teeth. It's about a psychopathic little girl who loves to mess with her mom. Very awesome horror book. Get back here. And then C, another one of my favorite series, the Divine Cities. All of these start with C. I've only read the first one, though, City of Stairs. So we'll go with that one. And then D, one of my favorite books of all time, Daisy Jones and the Six. I love this book, especially the audiobook. Audiobook is fantastic. And E, we're going to go down to a little Brando Sando here. We're going to go to Elantris, one of his standalones. Very underrated. This is one of my favorites. I mean, I love Stormlight, but after that, this is probably my favorite. And a lot of people hate it, but screw them. Then for F, we're going to go over to my favorite author of all time. We're going to go to Fever Dream, which is actually his vampire novel. Very good. And just below that, we have the author of the Themis Files, and his new book, the new start of a new trilogy, is A History of What Comes Next. It's very good. It's not quite as good as the Themis Files, which is actually my all-time favorite trilogy. The best trilogy of all time, people. Fight me. And then for I, we're going to go to my favorite book by one of my all-time favorite short story writers, and that would be The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. Terrific short story collection. And then you guys might be wondering when I'm going to go to Stephen King. Well, for J, we're going to go for Just After Sunset, a very newer and underrated Stephen King short story collection. One of his best. And for K, we're going to go back to the fantasy books here. This will make Andrew happy. Kings of the Wild. One of the best fantasy debuts I've ever read. This book was just so much fun, and I had so much fun finding all of the classic rock references in here. The first time I read this, or the only time I read it pretty quickly, and I was still able to catch a lot of them, but the second time I want to read it a little slower so I can catch all of the references and maybe jot them down as I read them. And then right next to that, we're going to go for L. We got a little alliteration here. The Lies of Locke Lamora. We got 3 L's here, people. My third favorite fantasy book. I love The Gentleman Bastards. And we're going to go back to Stephen King for M. We're going to move this stupid fan. And we're going to go back to M and Misery. My second favorite Stephen King novel. So good that I have 2 copies. So good. And for N, we're going to go back to George R.R. Martin here, to one of his best stories, Night Flyers. A fantastic sci-fi horror novella. Really good. It got made into a sci-fi show, and it wasn't that great, but I would definitely recommend the novella, especially the illustrated edition. And then for O, it would make sense for me to go with something like Oathbringer, but I'm actually going to highlight a new favorite of mine, The Only Good Indians, which is a very good new kind of literary horror novel by Stephen Graham Jones. Fantastic book. And then we can come back down here for P, The Poppy War. One of the best fantasy debuts I've ever read. I love this series, even though the third book, like the last couple chapters, aren't my favorite, and I have kind of mixed feelings. Yeah. Ugh. Hopefully I can cut that out. Or I might leave it in, I don't know. But overall, I just kind of have mixed feelings about this last book. It's still a 5-star book for me, because I loved most of it, but just the very ending. Oh, but we're kind of getting off track here. P, Poppy War. Great book. And it starts with P. And then Q. That might throw some people off here. And I scoured my shelves, and I couldn't quite think of any until I got to Ray Bradbury. Coming in hot here, folks. Quicker Than the Eye by Ray Bradbury. He's got so many short story collections. This is actually a pretty underrated one. I really like this one. And then for R, we can finally come to Stormlight Archive. A beast of a book, a brick of a book. We got Rhythm of War. Big old book. And it's also very good. And then for S, I guess it would make sense to go to my favorite book of all time. And that would be A Storm of Swords. And you can kind of tell that A Song of Ice and Fire is my favorite fantasy series. I have multiple copies of the books, and those are the books. And then I also have some of my reading copies up here with some doggos. And then for T, we can go to a very underrated fantasy series, the first book in the Song of Shattered Sands, and that would be 12 Kings and Sherikai. Fantastic book. I think this series is pretty underrated, pretty underhyped. I love this series. And then for U, I really don't have that many books that start with U until I go to Stephen King. We got Under the Dome. Big old book, Under the Dome. Pretty good book, but one of the worst endings I've ever read. Terrible ending. But a pretty good book. And then for V, we've got 2 books in the same series that start with V. Vicious and Vengeful. I loved Vengeful. This is an easy 5-star book for me. I read this book super quickly. I read this in like a 24-hour period, and it just flew by, and I really need to get to the sequel soon. And then for W, there's a surprising amount of books that I have that start with W. First of all, my second favorite fantasy series has 2. We got Way of Kings, my second favorite book of all time, Words of Radiance. And then we go over here. We got Wrath, which I've only read the first book, but that's one. Winds of Strife, which I'm really enjoying. And then we go to the Dark Tower series, and it has damn 4 books in a row that start with W. Wastelands, Wizard and Glass, Went Through the Keyhole, Wolves of the Kala. What are you doing, Stephen King? And then for X, I know this letter is going to give a lot of people a lot of problems. There's very few books that start with the letter X, but I happen to have one right here called Exhalation by Ted Zhang. Exhalation. Yep, it definitely starts with the letter X. There's definitely no way that I'm hiding another letter under my thumb. It clearly starts with the letter X. There's only a... Well, shit. And then for Y, I actually have 2 great books that start with Y. We got You and You Love Me. You guys love me, right? Right? And then for Z, I know this was probably going to give a lot of people a lot of problems because just like X, there's not a lot of books that start with the letter Z. And I mean, friggin' Stephen King's written 1 billion books. He doesn't have any books that start with Z. Sando, no Z's. George R. R. Martin, no Z's. Agatha Christie, I have all her friggin' 80 books. She didn't have one that starts with Z. But we're going to go to trusty old Ray Bradbury here. Zen in the Art of Writing. Coming in hot here, folks. Ray Bradbury. Zen in the Art of Writing. So that was the ABC's book title challenge. I got almost all of them. The one exception was X. I have 0 books that start with the letter X. I have no idea. I've never even heard of a book that starts with the letter X. Maybe like an X-Men comic book? That's the only thing I can think of. But I did pretty good. I got every other letter. Thanks again, Niko from Niko's Book Reviews for creating this book challenge. It was a lot of fun. And like he said, I'm sure there were some booktubers in the past who have done a similar type of video, but you can't own the ABCs. You just can't. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.